The afternoon my neighbor's mother tried to marry her off to a stranger, I became that stranger. Except I already knew exactly who she was. I'm Ryan Doyle, 34, paramedic in Charleston. The kind of job where you get very good at staying calm about things that should not be calm. I was not calm 2 Saturdays ago. I was on a bus with no air conditioning, holding a duffel bag full of dirty gym clothes, when the woman who lives 2 doors down from me sat in the seat beside mine, grabbed my forearm like it owed her money, and said the sentence that ruined my entire weekend in the best possible way. Please be my husband for the next 2 hours. I want to be clear that I did not immediately say yes. I said something closer to a wheeze. My truck was in the shop that morning, which is the only reason I was on a bus at all. I'd spent the ride so far doing the math on whether it was worth the cab fare home versus just accepting my fate as a man who rides public transit like a functioning member of society when someone dropped into the seat beside me hard enough to make the whole row shift. Here is what you need to know about Ivy Sinclair before anything else happens. She owns the bakery 2 blocks from our building, the one that smells like burnt sugar and good decisions at 6 in the morning. She leaves her apartment every single day before the sun is fully committed to showing up, usually holding 4 things she should not be carrying at once: a rolling pin, a laundry basket, her own shoes, a phone wedged under her chin, and she has never once dropped any of it, which I consider a low-grade miracle I witness on a near-weekly basis. I know this because I get off overnight shifts around the same time she starts her mornings, and for the better part of a year, my entire relationship with this woman consisted of me buying a burnt sugar croissant at 6:15 a.m. and her saying the usual paramedic without looking up. That was the whole thing. That was the sum total of Ryan and Ivy. There was one exception, and I hadn't planned on telling anyone about it, least of all her. Last February, I came home off a 16-hour shift and heard coughing through the wall we share, the deep, ugly kind that doesn't stop when you want it to. I stood in my own kitchen for a solid 10 minutes, telling myself it wasn't my business, that a grown woman with a bakery to run had presumably heard of medicine, that knocking on a neighbor's door at 11 at night made me the strange one in this scenario. Then I made soup anyway, because apparently my professional instincts don't clock out just because my shift did, and I knocked, and she answered in sweatpants and a fever, looking at me like I'd personally violated several unwritten rules of urban living. "I have soup," I said, which is not a sentence I had ever rehearsed, and it showed. "Why?" she rasped, not a question so much as an accusation. "Because you sound like you're dying, and I'm contractually obligated to care about that." She let me in for exactly as long as it took to hand her the soup, said thank you in a voice that suggested she'd rather owe a stranger than a neighbor, and closed the door. Neither of us brought it up again. I told myself that was the end of it. A single strange, soft moment, filed away and forgotten, the way you file away most things you're not ready to look at directly, until the bus. She had makeup on that didn't belong to a Saturday. Real clothes, the kind with a zipper instead of an elastic waistband. Her hair was doing something intentional, and she looked, more than anything else, like a woman who had made a terrible decision 3 hours ago and was only now realizing the scale of it. "You're my neighbor," I said, which felt important to point out, given the marriage proposal. "I'm aware," she said. "You're also the only man on this bus who isn't wearing a fanny pack, so congratulations, you've been promoted." I looked around. She was not wrong about the fanny packs. "Explain," I said, "fast, and skip the part where you tell me I'm dreaming, because I already checked. This is real." So, she explained fast the way people explain things when they're afraid slowing down will make them feel the whole thing at once. Her mother had spent 4 months arranging a lunch. Not a lunch, she corrected herself. An event, with place cards, with her grandmother's good napkins, with a man named Preston Marsh who did something with insurance and had, according to Ivy's mother, excellent teeth and 0 red flags. The entire extended family was waiting at the last stop on this bus route for a lunch that was actually an ambush wearing lunch's clothing. "I said I was bringing someone," Ivy said. 3 weeks ago. in a moment of what I can only describe as self-sabotage. I told my mother I was seeing someone so she'd stop setting up Preston Marsh, and instead of stopping, she just moved the lunch up. To meet him. To meet the someone. There is no someone. There was no someone 20 minutes ago. She looked at me like I was a vending machine that had just, against all odds, dispensed exactly what she needed. Now there's you. I wanted on record that I laughed, not a polite laugh, the kind of laugh that comes out sideways and startles the guy across the aisle. I'm not qualified for this, I said. I don't even know your last name. Sinclair, she said. I know yours. It's on your mailbox, Doyle, in that terrible font you picked. That font came with the building. That font came with a personality disorder. Here's the part I didn't expect. Somewhere between her explaining the stakes and me finding out her last name for the first time after 11 months of croissants, the bus hit a pothole hard enough to throw her shoulder into mine, and neither of us moved back right away. That's the whole moment. Nothing happened. I'm only telling you because I noticed it, and I don't usually notice things like that, and noticing it should have been my first warning. 2 hours, she said. From the last bus stop to dessert, then you're free. You said husband on the bus. Now it's 2 hours and lunch. Which is it? Husband was panic language, she said. Technically, you're my very serious boyfriend. Emotionally, my mother will hear husband anyway, so it doesn't much matter what word we use. That's not an answer. That's a legal disclaimer. Welcome to my family, she said, like it explained everything, which by the end of the afternoon, it mostly did. Boyfriend or husband? You said husband a minute ago. Her face did something complicated. My mother has a theory that boyfriends are practice and husbands are decisions. If I say boyfriend, she starts asking about timelines. If I say we're basically engaged, she leaves it alone for at least a year. That's insane. You've never met my mother. I should have said no. I want that in the record too, clearly, for anyone keeping score. I had a real weekend planned involving a couch and absolutely nothing else. Instead, I heard myself say, "What's my job in this story?" Because paramedic makes me look like a good option, and if your mother's basing marriage on 12 minutes of vetting, I don't want to peak too early. Ivy looked at me for a second too long. You're going to be very good at this, she said, and I already regret how good. That was the whole deal. Struck in under 10 minutes on a Charleston City bus, between a woman with wedding-adjacent makeup and a man holding a bag of dirty gym socks he was suddenly very aware of. We spent the next 40 minutes building a relationship out of nothing, the way you'd build a shed, fast, slightly crooked, held together mostly by confidence. Met at a mutual friend's barbecue. 8 months. I once brought her soup when she had the flu because sick guy Ryan tested well with mothers, according to Ivy, who apparently had run this simulation before with lesser candidates. What's my job in the fake version? I asked Boragt, besides paramedic. Paramedic is your job. We're not overcomplicating this. What do I like to do? Hobbies. Every fake boyfriend needs a hobby, or your mother's going to think I sit in a dark room between shifts. Ivy considered this with the seriousness of a woman drafting a business plan. You garden. I do not garden. You do now. It's humanizing. Men who garden don't get asked hard follow-up questions. What if she asks what I grow? Tomatoes. Everyone grows tomatoes. It's the vaguest possible vegetable. I feel like I'm being deposed. You're being prepared, she said. There's a difference. Preparation means you survive lunch. Depositions mean my mother wins. She fed me actual details about her family so I wouldn't walk in blind. Her mother, Diane, terrifying in a floral print way, the kind of terrifying that smiles the whole time. Her grandmother, Vivian, 91, who would ask about my intentions before she asked my name. Her brother Sam, harmless, mostly there for the free food and, according to Ivy, allergic to keeping a secret for longer than it takes to eat one deviled egg. And Preston Marsh, the insurance man with excellent teeth, who did not yet know he'd been benched. One more thing, Ivy said, lowering her voice like the bus itself might report her to Diane. If anyone asks how serious we are, the answer is very. Not marriage tomorrow serious, but past the point of no return serious. That's the whole reason this works. It has to be enough to make Preston Marsh irrelevant without being enough to make my mother start picking venues. That's a very specific amount of fake commitment. I've had 3 years to calibrate it. That's either impressive or extremely concerning. It's both, she said. I did warn you. One rule, Ivy said, as the bus slowed for the final stop. Don't be too good at this. If you're too convincing, I'll never hear the end of it when we break up in a month. You've already got our breakup planned. I plan everything, Doyle. It's why the bakery doesn't lose money. I stood up first and offered her my hand, mostly as a joke, the kind of gesture you make when you're performing a bit for an audience of nobody. She took it anyway. Her hand was small and flour-dry and stronger than it had any right to be. And something about that handshake felt more honest than anything either of us had said in the last 40 minutes, which is a strange thing to notice about a woman you agreed to marry for lunch. Ivy Sinclair was standing at the bus stop in a yellow dress, holding a bouquet like she was the one getting proposed to. Behind her, an entire folding table draped in a tablecloth, a banner that said nothing but somehow implied everything, and a man in a blazer that fit a little too well, smiling at us with the confidence of someone who had not yet been informed he was obsolete. "There she is," Diane said, arms already opening. "And you brought—" Her eyes landed on me and did a slow cataloging sweep, the kind that could probably assess a man's net worth off his shoes. "Well, you didn't say he looked like that." "Mom," Ivy said in the voice of a woman diffusing a bomb with her bare hands. "This is Ryan." "Ryan," Diane repeated, testing the name like a chef testing salt. "The soup Ryan." I glanced at Ivy. She did not blink. "That's me," she said. "Soup guy, reformed sock bag enthusiast." I lifted the duffel bag slightly, immediately regretted it, and set it back down. Nobody laughed except me, internally, with structure and dignity. We walked toward the table like two people who had done this 100 times, and I felt Ivy's hand find mine again, this time without a joke attached to it, and I thought very clearly, this is the dumbest thing I have ever agreed to. And also, I would like to do it slightly longer than 2 hours. I didn't say that part out loud. I'm a professional, mostly. The lunch started fine. That's the thing nobody tells you about disasters. They always start fine, with iced tea and small talk, right up until the moment they don't. Sweet tea and cut lemon hit me first, then the low hum of somebody's radio playing from a car 2 spaces over, then the specific clatter of a folding table that had clearly hosted 100 family gatherings before this one, and would host 100 more. Diane had gone all out. A tablecloth that had definitely been ironed, a centerpiece of white roses that looked suspiciously bridal for a casual family lunch, and place cards, actual place cards, with my name spelled correctly, which meant she'd known exactly who was coming before I'd agreed to come at all. I filed that detail away and decided not to mention it. Vivian, Ivy's grandmother, claimed the seat directly across from me and studied my face like she was appraising a used car. "You have good color," she announced to the whole table. "Not sickly. I like a man who isn't sickly." "Thank you," I said. "I try to stay non-sickly on purpose." "Grandma vets by complexion," Ivy murmured, close enough that only I could hear. "Consider yourself flattered." Sam, Ivy's brother, shook my hand with the enthusiasm of a man who had clearly hoped this lunch would be shorter and less structured. "Paramedic," he said, nodding at whatever Ivy had apparently told him weeks ago while inventing this entire relationship. That's a real job. Good for you." "It has its moments," I said. "Mostly bad moments, if I'm being honest. That's usually why they call us." He laughed. Actually laughed, and for one small minute I thought, this might work. "So what do you do for fun, Ryan?" Sam asked, reaching for the breadbasket like a man settling in for the long haul. "Besides, saving lives." "I garden," I said, with the flat confidence of a man who had rehearsed this exact lie for approximately 6 minutes. "Yeah?" Sam looked genuinely interested, which I hadn't planned for. "What do you grow?" "Tomatoes," I said. Man, tomatoes are hard. Mine keep getting some kind of blight. I had no follow-up. I had never grown a tomato in my life. I had in fact killed a cactus once through sheer neglect, a plant specifically designed to survive neglect. Yeah, I said, buying time. Blight's rough. You gotta rotate the soil. Ivy's knee found mine under the table again, harder this time, which I understood to mean stop talking about soil. He's modest about it, she said smoothly. You should see his balcony. It's a whole thing. I'd love to see it sometime, Diane said in the tone of a woman filing that sentence away for later verification. Anytime, I said, already dreading the logistics of that particular lie catching up with me. Vivian, who had been quietly buttering a roll through all of this with the focus of a surgeon, set her knife down. Ryan, she said, do you love my granddaughter? The table went still in a different way than it had for the tomatoes. Diane's fork paused mid-air. Sam froze mid-chew. Even Preston, 2 seats down, looked up from his sweet tea with sudden, sharpened interest. Grandma, Ivy said, that's not really a lunch question. I'm 91, Vivian said. Every question is a lunch question now. I don't have the years left to work up to things. I felt every eye at that table land on me at once, and for a second, one long, strange second, I forgot this was supposed to be a performance. I looked at Ivy, who was looking back at me with an expression I couldn't fully name, something between panic and daring me to answer honestly. I think, I said slowly, that's a question with more history behind it than a lunch table really has room for. Vivian studied me for a moment, then nodded once, apparently satisfied with the dodge in a way that told me she'd clocked it as a dodge and respected the craftsmanship. Fair, she said, and went back to her roll. Preston Marsh did not go back to his sweet tea so easily. He sat 2 seats down in his excellent blazer, glass in hand like it had personally wronged him, watching me with the specific, quiet suspicion of a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. So, Diane said, once the salad had been distributed and the real interrogation could begin. 8 months. Ryan, tell me, how did the two of you meet? I felt Ivy's knee press against mine under the table. A warning shot. Barbecue, I said. Mutual friend's place. She was arguing with someone about whether pie crust should be all butter or half shortening. All butter, Ivy said immediately, like this was the part of the story she needed to protect most. She won the argument, I added, loudly. I found it charming, in an alarming sort of way. Diane's mouth twitched, the first genuine crack in her floral armor. That does sound like her. Diane asked about my parents next, the kind of question that comes wrapped in politeness but is really an audit. I told her the truth on that one, because lying about family felt like a line even a fake fiancé shouldn't cross. My mother in Colombia, my father gone 11 years now, a heart that finally gave out the same stubborn way he'd lived the rest of his life. Diane's face softened in a way I hadn't seen yet, the practiced toughness slipping for just a second. I'm sorry, she said. That's hard losing a parent that way, sudden. It teaches you to notice things faster, I said. Which parts of a person you actually want to remember, I mean. You don't get the luxury of taking your time with it. I felt Ivy go still beside me, not the tense stillness from earlier, something softer. Later, on the walk back to the table after the crepe myrtles, she'd tell me that was the exact moment something shifted for her. Not the kiss, not the confession, but that one unguarded sentence about grief, dropped into the middle of a fake relationship like it had nowhere else to go. Sam refilled everyone's tea, and the conversation drifted, briefly, into safer water. Bakery gossip, a cousin's wedding 2 towns over, whether the crepe myrtles needed trimming before fall. I let myself relax into it. The specific, dangerous relaxation of a man who thinks the hard part is already behind him. We were doing fine. We were, against every reasonable expectation, doing fine. And then Preston Marsh set down his sweet tea with the exact precision of a man about to say something he'd been chewing on since the bus pulled up. Sorry, he said. This is going to sound strange. But do you live in the Bellhaven building? Off Ashcroft? Everything in my chest went very still. The specific stillness of a call coming in that you already know is bad before dispatch says a word. I do, I said, because lying about that felt like a different, riskier category of lie than the barbecue. I thought so. Preston smiled, not unkindly, more like a man solving a small crossword clue. I was there in the spring, dropping off my sister's rent check. She's in 4B. I remember you. You were carrying a laundry basket at, 6 in the morning, arguing with the elevator. He turned to Ivy, still pleasant, still just making conversation. Isn't that your building, too? The table went quiet in that subtle small-town way where everyone pretends not to listen and fails professionally. It is, Ivy said very carefully. Huh. Preston looked between us, and I watched the math finish itself behind his eyes. So you two are neighbors. That's a fun coincidence. Barbecue and neighbors. Diane's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Neighbors, she repeated, the way you'd repeat a word you suspected was a typo. You never mentioned he was your neighbor. It didn't come up, Ivy said. For 8 months? We don't talk about real estate on dates, Mom. I would think, Diane said, setting her fork down entirely now, voice sharpening into something that had clearly disciplined children before, that if I had been dating a man for 8 months, and he happened to live down the hall from me, that fact would come up. Once. At minimum. I felt the whole table's attention swing toward me like a searchlight. This was the part of the plan Ivy and I had not built a shed for. We had built a relationship out of a barbecue and soup and a pie crust argument, and none of it accounted for the fact that we lived 30 feet apart, and apparently nobody in this family knew. We kept it low-key, I said, reaching for something, anything. Ivy's private about... I can speak for myself, Ryan, Ivy said, too fast, and I understood immediately that we had just made it worse by contradicting each other in real time, in front of an audience that had clearly been raised on cross-examination. Vivian set down her tea with the crisp finality of a judge delivering a verdict. Something is not adding up here, she said, not unkindly, just factually, the way you'd point out a math error. And I am 91 years old. I don't have the patience left to be lied to at lunch. I glanced at Ivy. Ivy glanced at me. And for one long, terrible second, neither of us said anything at all, which is somehow worse than saying the wrong thing. Can we take a walk? Ivy said finally to her mother in a voice that had gone smaller than I'd heard it go all day. Just give us a minute. Diane didn't answer right away. She looked at her daughter the way mothers look at daughters when they already know, on some level, that the story they've been told is not the whole story, and they are deciding whether today is the day to demand the rest of it. 5 minutes, Diane said, and then I want the truth, Ivy. All of it. We walked away from the table, past the banner that didn't say anything, and somehow still felt like it was mocking us, out toward the parking lot where a row of crepe myrtles gave us just enough cover to have the conversation nobody at that table was going to let us skip. That went well, I said. Don't, Ivy said, but there was no heat behind it, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from holding something up for longer than your arms were built to hold it. I don't know what to tell them. We could tell them the truth. The truth is that I asked a paramedic to marry me on a city bus 2 hours ago because I panicked. When you say it like that, it sounds unhinged. It was unhinged, Ryan. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a second. I've spent 3 years telling my mother I'm fine being alone, that the bakery is enough, that I don't need her setting up excellent teeth insurance men. And every single time, some part of me panics and I make it worse instead of just saying that. Saying what? She dropped her hands, looked at me properly for the first time since the bus. That I don't want Preston Marsh. That I didn't want any of the 6 men before him either. That the reason I said someone existed is that some pathetic, stubborn part of me has spent the last year hoping the someone would eventually be real, instead of a guy I made up out of soup and a barbecue that never happened. The yard went very still around us. I could hear the wind moving through the crepe myrtles, a lawnmower somewhere down the block, the specific hush of a conversation that had accidentally become more honest than either of us had signed up for. "Ivy," I said. "Don't," she said again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was something closer to bracing. "Ivy," I said again anyway, because apparently I only know one move when I'm nervous, and it's repeating her name like it'll buy me time to think of something smarter to say next. I have said a lot of calming things to a lot of frightened people in my career. I am, by every professional measure, good at staying steady when someone else's world is falling apart in front of me. My hands were not steady standing under those crepe myrtles. I kept them shoved in my pockets so nobody would notice, the way you hide a tremor from a patient so it doesn't become their problem, too. "For the record," I said, "sick guy Ryan wasn't invented out of nowhere. I built him out of the one real thing I had. The soup. Last winter time." Ivy went quiet. "I know it happened, Ryan. I was there. Fever and all." "I know you know it happened. I mean, I've thought about it since. More than once. More than a reasonable number of times, honestly, for a bowl of chicken soup handed off in a doorway." She blinked, like that part actually surprised her. Not the soup itself, but the fact that it had lodged somewhere in me and stayed there. "You never said anything after. You just went back to croissants like nothing happened." "Because you're my neighbor," I said, which was true, and also, the second it left my mouth, sounded like the single worst excuse a grown man had ever offered for cowardice. "Because it seemed like the kind of thing you don't bring up twice, in case it embarrasses someone. In case it embarrasses me." "Embarrasses you how?" I stood there holding an answer I hadn't planned on giving anyone, least of all her. Least of all in a parking lot with her family 50 feet away, deciding how much of the truth they were owed. "Because I've been buying a croissant from you at 6 in the morning for almost a year," I said. "And every single time, for about 4 seconds, I think about saying something that isn't the usual. And every single time I don't, because you're my neighbor, and neighbors who ruin things still have to see each other in the elevator." The silence changed. I could feel it change. The way the air changes right before a storm actually arrives instead of just threatening to. "Were you joking just now?" Ivy asked. "On the bus, when you said you'd do this?" There are questions that come with escape routes built in. That one didn't have any. "No," I said. "I wasn't joking." Her lips parted like she meant to say something, and then didn't. Somewhere behind us, the folding table full of relatives was almost certainly watching this entire exchange through a hedge of crepe myrtle, and I found, standing there, that for the first time all day, I didn't care. "This was supposed to be fake," she said, but it came out closer to a question than a statement. "It still can be," I said, "if you want it to be. I'm not going to make this harder for you than your mother already has." "That's the problem," Ivy said. "I don't want it to be fake anymore. And I don't know what to do with that because 20 minutes ago it was the easiest lie I've ever told, and now it feels like the truest thing I've said all week." I reached for her hand, the same hand I'd taken as a joke at the bus stop, and this time neither of us pretended it was a bit. The kiss started careful, the kind of careful that comes from two people checking, silently, whether the other person is really asking for this or just caught up in the adrenaline of a family ambush gone sideways. Then it went warm, her hand curling into the front of my shirt, mine finding the small of her back like it had been waiting all year for permission. And then, for one unhurried second, it went somewhere past warm entirely. The kind of kiss that makes the parking lot, the crepe myrtles, and Preston Marsh's excellent teeth all functionally disappear. We broke apart to the sound of someone clearing their throat with great, deliberate ceremony. Sam was standing at the edge of the crepe myrtles, holding 2 plates of cake like he'd wandered out for dessert and stumbled into a different movie entirely. "So," he said, "should I tell Mom the wedding's back on, or—" "Sam," Ivy said, "I'm just asking logistics. Go inside." He went inside. He did not, notably, put the cake down first. We didn't walk back to the table right away. For a few minutes, we just stood there under the crepe myrtles, neither of us in a hurry to trade the quiet for whatever was waiting on the other side of that hedge. "They're going to have questions," Ivy said. "Real ones, not the fun kind. I know. My mother doesn't let things go. She's going to want a timeline, a real one, and I don't have one because 40 minutes ago you were the guy who buys croissants and calls me the usual. I know that too, so what do we tell them? I didn't have a clean answer, and I decided, standing there, not to pretend I did. I don't know yet. I know I don't want to walk back in there and tell them it was fake and watch you go back to being the daughter who's fine being alone. I know that much. Ivy looked at me for a long moment, and whatever she saw didn't seem to fully settle her, which was fair because it hadn't fully settled me either. That's not a plan, Ryan. No, I agreed, it's not. We walked back to the table together anyway, hand in hand, no longer performing anything, which turned out to be its own kind of terrifying. Diane looked up as we approached, her expression unreadable in the specific way mothers make their expressions unreadable, right before they decide something important. Well, she said, I take it there's an update. There's an update, Ivy said. The barbecue wasn't real. The 8 months wasn't real. Ryan's my neighbor, not my boyfriend, and I told you he existed because I panicked about Preston, and I am deeply, deeply sorry for the lunch you clearly spent a lot of money on. Diane's face did several things in quick succession. Surprise, something like anger, and then, unexpectedly, the corner of her mouth twitching upward despite herself. And the kiss my son just watched from the bushes? That part, Ivy said, glancing at me, might be real. We're still working that out. Preston Marsh, to his enormous credit, laughed first, a real laugh, relieved more than anything, the laugh of a man who had clearly not been that invested in the outcome to begin with. Honestly, he said, this is the best lunch I've been to all year. No offense, Diane. None taken, Diane said faintly, still looking at me like she was recalculating something. Ryan. Soup. Ryan. Real haiku Ryan. Sit down. Eat something before this family scares you off entirely. I sat down. Vivian studied me again, that same appraising look from earlier, and this time apparently satisfied with whatever conclusion she'd reached. She reached over and patted my hand once, briskly, like a woman closing a file. Good color, she said again. I stand by it. We didn't leave before dessert in the end. We stayed for all of it. Cake and coffee and Diane's slow, careful questions that were less an interrogation now, and more a woman trying to understand a story that had rewritten itself twice in one lunch. She wasn't fully sold, not yet. I caught her watching us over her coffee cup more than once, the particular watching of a mother who has been burned before by a good story told well, and I understood that whatever this was going to become, it wasn't going to be handed a clean bill of trust in a single afternoon. That was fine. I hadn't earned one yet. Somewhere in the middle of it, Ivy reached into her bag for a tissue and pulled out, along with it, her crumpled bus ticket, and set it on the table between us without thinking about it. The way you set down something you've forgotten you're still holding. I picked it up before she could throw it away. I'm keeping this, I said. It's a bus ticket, Ryan. It's the bus ticket, I said. There's a difference. She didn't argue. She just watched me fold it in half and put it in my shirt pocket, over my heart, in a gesture so deliberately corny that we both laughed at it immediately, which felt like exactly the right way to laugh at something that mattered. The bus ride home was quieter than the one out. We sat in the same 2 seats, out of some unspoken agreement neither of us discussed, her shoulder against mine again. This time on purpose. Your grandmother asked me if I loved you, I said, somewhere past the halfway point. I noticed. I didn't answer her. I noticed that too. I think I dodged it because the real answer felt too big for a lunch table with deviled eggs on it. Ivy turned her head against the seat to look at me. And now? Now that we're not at a lunch table. Now feels like it might actually be big enough to hold it, I said, if you want to hear it. I sat next to a stranger on a bus and asked him to marry me for 2 hours, Ryan. I think I've made my appetite for big things pretty clear today. I love you, I said. Or I'm most of the way there, fast enough that it scares me a little, which is probably the same thing said more honestly. She didn't say it back right away, and I didn't need her to. She just laced her fingers through mine, rested her head on my shoulder the way she probably would have if this had actually been 8 ordinary months instead of one extraordinary afternoon, and said quietly, "Ask me again in a week. I have a feeling the answer's going to be the same, but I'd like to enjoy getting there properly, for once, instead of inventing it on a bus." "That's fair," I said. "I can wait a week." I did not, as it turned out, need to wait a week. It took 4 days, delivered over the bakery counter at 6:15 in the morning, in front of the 2 regulars by the window, in a voice loud enough that I'm fairly sure the whole block heard it. But that's a different story, and I've already used up my 2 hours. 3 weeks later, I still buy the croissant at 6:15. Ivy still says the usual without looking up, except now she says it while leaning across the counter to kiss me first, which the 2 regulars by the window have stopped pretending not to notice. I got to see her in her actual element last Tuesday when the ovens went down 20 minutes before the morning rush. I expected panic. I've talked plenty of strangers down from it professionally. Instead, she rerouted half her order list, triple-timed the display case, and handled 4 furious customers in the exact tone she uses on me when I leave dishes in the sink. By the time the ovens were fixed, she'd lost 6 pastries and 0 customers, and wiped her hands on her apron like the whole thing had been mildly inconveniencing at best. "You're terrifyingly good at that," I told her. "I run a bakery, Ryan. Every day is a small emergency. You'd know something about that." "I don't garden either, for the record." "I know," she said. "I killed the fake tomato plants myself, emotionally." Diane calls twice a week now, still not fully forgiving the lunch but sending home pie for Ryan anyway, which in her language is roughly a formal engagement announcement. Preston Marsh, last I heard, is dating someone from his gym. He sent Ivy a card that said, "Glad it worked out. The crepe myrtles have never seen anything like it." We keep it taped to the register. The bus ticket lives beside it now, framed, no bigger than my palm. It's nothing to look at. A crumpled, faded strip of paper that used to mean nothing more than a seat on a 2 o'clock bus to a lunch I never should have survived. Now it means something else entirely, and neither of us has to explain it to anyone who asks, because the 2 of us are usually standing right there, close enough to answer with a look instead of a word. What would you have done if a neighbor you'd barely spoken to sat down beside you and asked you to be someone you weren't, for just 2 hours? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.